Okay, and rolling. Tom, Matt, thank you so much for being here. I'm really, really excited to have you on my podcast for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is episode number 10. So it's a tiny milestone. It's something, it's a tiny project, tiny endeavor that I started last year because of the pandemic. But I've just fallen in love with just chatting to people, especially about topics that I'm so passionate about, like fighting and fitness, nutrition, things like this. And another reason is the topic. I've never had any sort of issues with weight loss. However, it's always been something that I needed to educate myself a lot, either via Google or watching YouTube videos or just chatting to people, watching other podcasters as well. Mm-hmm. I've learned a lot on Joe Rogan podcast when he had people like Rhonda Patrick and discussing like tiny little details of when you eat this you shouldn't eat that, etc., etc. But I am a DIY fighter. I do everything myself, which it has some positive side, but it's got negative sides because I might watch a crappy YouTube video that will tell me just a bunch of bullshit, really. Yeah. So we've got packed episode. There's loads of questions about both nutrition and fitness. But before we kick off, could you very quickly introduce yourself? So who you are and what you do.
Cool. Do you want to go for it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Tom, and I originally founded Apex Fitness Systems nearly 9 years ago now. So really, really quickly, obviously Matt joined me as well. And my primary kind of role is working with members of the general public in Apex Fitness Systems, mainly looking at sort of improving body composition and health. And they're very linked in my opinion as well. So we're usually helping people lose fat, gain muscle, get more mobile, get more healthy, and like looking at that as a kind of holistic approach to their lifestyle. And then the other kind of area that I work in is I work with combat athletes, grapplers, MMA fighters, strikers. We do a lot of training with them in terms of their strength and conditioning, their fight camps, and their overall kind of preparation for those things as well.
Whoa. Are you a fighter yourself? Have you?
Yeah, so I used to compete quite a lot in MMA. I had 13 fights at the amateur level, and I competed for, like, at the time, the kind of championship kind of at that level over in Wales. And I now mainly compete in submission grappling, and I've had about close to 100 matches at like elite level or advanced level, so kind of pro belt and above. So I've done a fair amount of competition and training myself. Yeah.
Brilliant. Cheers.
So my background kind of echoes Tom's a lot in a way, but probably without so much of the fighting involved. So I'm maybe don't want to get punched in the face as much as Tom does.
Are you a lover?
I guess so. Yeah. So yeah, my background is I've been a nutritionist now for approaching 10 years. Tom and I knew each other kind of from way back when, from our work as gym instructors. We were kind of working our way through the ranks in the fitness industry, getting all the relevant qualifications. And I was teaching classes in gyms, teaching spin classes, all the kind of various things that most people do. And I was reading a lot of information about training, but I found that I gravitated more towards the nutrition side in what I was interested in. I guess my background is similar to Tom's in that I've always been quite sporty, played a lot of sports, but I was always somebody that was very, very underweight. So I needed to put on quite a bit of weight in my kind of teen years for a variety of reasons, sort of confidence reasons, health reasons. And anybody that's tried to gain weight will realise that nutrition is paramount to that. So I found myself just through kind of, I guess, my own self-experimentation, reading a lot about nutrition. And from there I thought, actually, I've got more of a knack for this than I do for the training side of things. So Tom and I knew each other. He had just started Apex personal training, and he sort of said, looking for a nutritionist, why don't you come aboard? And the rest, I guess, is history in that way. So yeah, and my clientele basically mirrors Tom's in that I work with everybody from your kind of average Joe person who's interested in body composition, weight loss, muscle gain, all the way through to professional athletes. Like my kind of working in and around fight sports has led me to working in, you know, in competitive mixed martial arts and grappling and things like that, helping fighters prepare for weight cuts and for competition and whatnot. So
weight cuts, that's a really interesting topic as well.
yeah.
Okay, brilliant, fantastic, amazing credentials. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. We can't really start any sort of discussion without mentioning lockdown and COVID, because obviously this had a huge impact on sports industry in general. But I don't want to start about, you know, talking about people who, you know, were a little bit lazy and maybe put on weight or didn't put any effort into making the best out of it. Do you know from your experience, your friends, your students, your fighters, do you know like a really, really positive story that you can share with me?
Yeah, I mean, we've now done 3 challenges, haven't we? Online challenges. So as we heard about the first lockdown, we routinely do online challenges throughout the year where we coach a group of generally 20 people through body composition goals in a kind of a distance base. And we were in the middle of beginning our marketing for our second challenge of the year, and it kind of interlinked with when we got the sort of the announcement about lockdown. So almost overnight, we essentially pivoted our branding of that challenge to a summer theme challenge over to a lockdown theme challenge. So we called it Lockdown Level Up, which was all about basically using the period of time where you're at home for something positive.
Yeah.
You know, because you know, there's this sort of that saying, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react to it. So I think the first lockdown, there was quite an air of positivity in the air anyway, because it was I guess a new experience for a lot of people, and the sun was out, and so we capitalized on that quite a bit. We had a good challenge the first time, didn't we? We had quite a few people who just really kind of nailed their goals. We had people that lost a lot of weight, guys that have gained muscle, people that have sort of said to us that you've really helped us kind of keep our sanity in this position, because I think lockdown, what it removed from a lot of people's lives is like stimulus, things that give people, I guess, their identity and their release in life, and exercise is one of those.
I think almost more, the thing that I missed more than anything else was these sort of relationships with my friends.
Yeah.
So even if you go and exercise, you lose weight, you feel amazing, and your hormones are buzzing in your body, and you feel happy. But it's this banter between your mates, because if someone's in your corner or they spar with you, there is very unique bond between these people.
Absolutely.
And not seeing them for a year. We had our first session with Burpit on Thursday, and
like coming home, isn't it?
it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was hard, but it was amazing, and I could see that some of the guys put in a bit of weight, but I have to say I tried to be really positive about everything, and I trained a little bit. I cycled, and I trained with my son a little bit. So we had like rolling sessions every evening. He's only 13, but it's hard. I think it's even harder on your mental health than your physical health.
I mean, one of the things that I think was a big aspect of the challenges is that whether we're in lockdown or not, we never just send people stuff to do. So one of the aspects of it is we have an online group. And I think that was probably one of the strongest points of it.
Huge.
In that it just created a community of 20 plus people plus their coaches, and they were all kind of striving for the same thing, but all hitting the same barriers, obstacles of the lockdown. But they knew every day they could tune into the group, speak to other people going through similar experiences, speak to Matt and I. So I think the positivity of the group was like one of the best groups we've probably ever had in a challenge.
Massively.
And weirdly assisted by all of this set of kind of lockdown restrictions and barriers. It was actually one of the most like positive groups, atmospheres I think we've ever had on any of our challenges. So.
We've always tried to capitalise on like the community aspects of fitness,
so
and lockdown almost helped people lean into that more, because they really, really strived for a sense of community when it was removed from them. And you can go on Zoom and you can kind of chat to people, but having a group of people that are all actively working towards the same goal is quite a powerful thing. Even outside of fitness, just anything that you're trying to do, if you have a group that's all accountable to one another and we're going, we all want to better ourselves here, Everybody feels accountable to each other. They've got the coaching from Tom and I to kind of have like the expertise behind it. And yeah, it actually became something that was really successful for us. And we were really pleased because we went from I think probably what a lot of businesses were feeling at the time of this could really affect us to we've actually had potentially one of our most successful couple of months during that time.
Yeah, we seriously considered not running it at all for a point where like, it's probably not at the forefront of people's minds. Maybe we need to like step back and look what we're going to do. We had a kind of chat about it, didn't we? And we were like, maybe we should put a positive spin on things, rather than go, oh guys, we're shutting the doors, we'll get back to you. We were like, actually, let's push ahead. Yeah. And like I say, definitely one of the best ones we've done.
We sort of even considered, like from an economical perspective, if people would even want to spend their money on something to do with fitness, because, obviously the lockdown made money tight for everybody a number of ways, but it sold extremely quickly, and people were saying like, this is the thing that I actually want to put my resources into, because otherwise, to your point about the negative aspects of lockdown, otherwise I'm going to put it into other ways of getting stimulus, e.g. eating, whatever it might be. So I think people, they really liked that aspect. So
yeah, fantastic. I love hearing these stories because as you said, you can capitalize on it beautifully, but I think there's still a huge group of people that literally gave up and just binged on Netflix and Amazon Prime and just overeaten. Okay, so let's start with the first question, which will be about nutrition. So I guess the first part, let's say, will be about nutrition more than anything else. Human beings have very weird relationship with food. Okay, so in the past, when we're hunters and gatherers, we ate to survive, to procreate. That's it. Okay, now it's all about luxury, indulgence, convenience, with fast food. What's your take on this sort of modern relationship that we've got with food?
Yeah, it's very difficult. So there's a terminology that's kind of been established in research now to kind of describe the modern way that we eat, and it's the fact that we live in an obesogenic environment, which basically means that a lot of the environmental factors that we have in front of us are pro-weight gain versus anti-weight gain. So to your point about things like the convenience of food, the sheer availability of food advertising around us, we have instant gratification now in many different ways. So with the the kind of the invention of apps and stuff like Deliveroo and Just Eat and whatnot, and they're constantly sending you emails going, here's our latest deal, and they often catch people when they're at their feeling their very weakest. So the environment in the modern days is not necessarily set up for people to have the best self-control. Yeah. So I'm always trying to explain to a client that you must get to a point where your own environment, so the places that you routinely visit, your home being the main one, your work environment, you need to try to set it up so that it's allowing you to succeed versus fail, because there's a certain element of you being in control of the things that you see visually around you and the behaviours that elicits. So little things like how does somebody set their kitchen layout out? Do you have convenience, high calorie food sat on the tabletops, or do you have a fruit bowl sat on the tabletops? Because although it may seem like a silly thing, it's if you come home from work and you're extremely stressed and you've got a family-sized multi-pack of crisps on the side, your ability to make a good decision in that moment is going to be quite impaired. Yeah. And you've actively made the choice to set your environment up to fail rather than succeed. So I'm, when I work with somebody, especially people that struggle with their weight and have been overweight or obese, I always treat them with a large amount of compassion and empathy, because I realise that the world that we live in now is, to your point, is no longer a hunter-gatherer world. It's no longer, you can go and pick your food and it's all very simple. It's food, high calorie foods are everywhere, and the drive to eat them is everywhere. So
it's ridiculous. It's wherever you go, any supermarket or little shop around the corner, you have to have a microscope to find something healthy.
Yeah. I mean, a little thing is, when have you ever seen 2 for the price of 1 on fruit and veg? It's always two for the price of 1, or buy one get one free is always on chocolate, biscuits, things like that. And like you're upsold, so when you go to the counter, you fill your car up or whatever, and it's we've got these chocolate bars on offer. It's never we've got these fruit on offer or whatever. So
there's a lot of strategy, and I remember years ago doing a business course, and there was a guy to come in and he talked about I think it was Walmart that ran this strategy where they used to always put their on offer beer next to nappies or diapers in America because they said they realised that a lot of times, to be really typical, but guys coming home from work, their wife calls them and says, "We need some more nappies, can you grab some?" They go get nappies, the beer's right there.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like little tactics like that. Like you say, the environment is definitely set up, I guess, to fail
100%.
rather than to succeed.
That should be surely illegal to do things like this, really. But there's, I mean, there's so much about lobbying on TV right now, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Massive corporations, they're just
Exactly.
buying off politicians to make these decisions, so it's easier for them to sell this crap to all of us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are people whose jobs are to be food scientists, and basically that means to get employed by food manufacturers to make food taste irresistible. So, if you own Nestle or whatever and you make chocolate biscuits for a living, you're going to employ somebody who has the absolute best formula for that biscuit to be irresistible to taste. And that's somebody's job. Somebody earns a great salary doing that to make food irresistible. So as soon as you understand that, you realize that the deck's massively stacked against a lot of people, but at the same time, you can still control a lot of your environment if you want to actively seek that out. And you need to just be, this is obviously where we come into play, it's sort of be coached on good behaviors around food, and not being self-aware is a big thing. So I'll talk to somebody who is in an office job, for instance, and they'll often say to me like, I get these like 3 o'clock hunger pangs. So it's that space of time between like the 5 o'clock work end and then kind of clock watching, saying like, the work day's nearly over, and I almost like can't stop myself from eating a chocolate bar or whatever. And I try to explain to them that's not really a biological drive that you have there. You're not actually hungry. What you're doing is you're clock watching. You're saying it's 3 o'clock. I've got a couple of hours of work left. I need to distract myself to make this manageable, because otherwise I'm going to go and punch my boss in the face or something. And a chocolate bar would be really good right now. So that self-awareness of saying, actually, why am I doing this? Why am I thinking about food in this way? Rather than going, there's a vending machine right there. I may as well just go and get something.
I completely regained control of what I eat a couple of years ago when I started fasting. When I told my family, I watched this again on Joe Rogan, I'm starting fasting, intermittent fasting. I'm not going to eat. Oh, you stupid! Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Yeah. And I thought, I'm not going to make it. I do it, and I do it to this day.
Yeah.
And I can not. I usually have really good. Like double espresso in the morning with no milk, just this, and nothing until midday, 1 o'clock. I can train and I'll be absolutely fine. But people say, I wouldn't be able to do that. I would starve. No, you wouldn't.
No,
Get busy and you'll see time will fly, and suddenly, oh my God, it's 2 o'clock and I haven't eaten.
I think, in my opinion, that is the single biggest positive factor about fasting. Is it's not necessarily, although there are certain metabolic adaptations that are good for the human body, it's actually the behavior aspects of it. It teaches you that hunger isn't this thing that you need to have like a panic reaction about, and that there's things that we often tell ourselves that we just make ourselves believe, and one of them is like, I must eat in the morning. Like if I don't eat, I'm going to be starving. And probably the first time you do it, because hunger is quite pattern related, so you're definitely going to be hungry the first time, but people think that hunger is like this exponential thing that just gets worse and worse and worse until eventually your head explodes, and that's not what happens. Hunger goes in waves. So I'm sure we've all experienced being so hungry that you no longer are hungry. Like you get to a point where you're so ready to eat, and then it just kind of goes away, and you almost just feel a bit empty, and then it just dissipates. And that's actually how hunger works. It goes in waves, up and down and up and down. So fasting can be quite a good way to almost liberate yourself from like the hold that food has over you. Like, I must eat.
My wife was worried about me. She said, are you okay? You haven't eaten anything. I'm all right. I'm fine. And do you know what? I think fasting kept my body weight at bay around lockdown, because it's just another meal that I would have eaten.
Yep, I mean, it is a great way to control calories if it suits you from a lifestyle perspective. Like, I've definitely lean into that type of thing. I never liked breakfast ever. I can always remember my mum saying, you've got to eat breakfast before you go to school and that, and when I took control of that, I was like, okay, I'm just not going to eat breakfast. But I like eating a lot more after training. A lot of our training, if you train as martial arts, tends to be in the evening, and so I'd much rather have to eat around that training window than at time in the morning, So it is interesting, but I think a lot of the time, like Matt was saying, hunger generally is seen as a bad thing. Like, oh, you're hungry, you should eat. you know, whereas saying, do you know what, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's nothing to panic about.
No.
And actually, you made a really important point about, you know, eating after the training. So let's talk about the mixture of training and eating, because that's something that I've struggled with for years now. I never know how much, what to eat before training session, whether it's just me doing a little bit of cardio or maybe sparring for a couple hours. And also, I don't really know what to eat before a fight. So I've had nearly 10 fights, and it's been a nightmare, constant nightmare. I don't know what to eat, whether it's an hour before, 2 hours before, you know, and you hear your friends telling you, no. There's a gummy bear. Yeah, have a gummy bear. Chew on it for 10 minutes. It'll maintain your sugar level. Or no carbs, just fats. So is there some sort of magic pill around this?
Yeah, so I guess maybe not a magic pill, but there are, I guess, best practices that we can go on in terms of, so if we think about workout nutrition as the window of pre, during exercise and post-workout nutrition, the first thing that I would encourage somebody to do is assess what do I hope to get out of this training session, right? Because nutrition is a supportive thing to training. So you got to think, okay, what type of training am I doing? What adaptations do I want my body to go through? So if I'm lifting weights, am I lifting weights to gain muscle? Am I lifting weights to simply burn calories? If you're sparring, what type of sparring is it going to be? Is it going to be super intense? Is it not going to be super intense? So consider the type of training you're doing. Now, everything leading up to that session, the way that you eat should be to support your energy levels during the training session. So if you consider when was the last time I trained, right? Because if you think of what we call glycogen in the body, so glycogen is the storage form of carbohydrate, and you can think of this as almost like energy tanks on the body. Think of it like filling up your car. And we store the majority of our glycogen inside our muscle tissue, and that will deplete as we exercise. So if you consider I'm about to train, when was the last time I exercised? If you're in a state where your muscle glycogen is already depleted, pre-workout nutrition becomes almost of the utmost importance, because otherwise, if you don't eat correctly, you're going into that training session in an impaired state. Conversely, if you're doing your first session of the day, for instance, and you already had a large meal the night before, you might already be going into that training session with full glycogen levels. So what you eat during that training session maybe takes a little bit of a back step, hence why maybe you might be able to do it fasted, because you're basically already performing at your best in that moment. Then in terms of the actual exercise sessions, so as a general rule of thumb, we have like different energy systems that we use when we exercise, and the lower the intensity of exercise, the more we use dietary fat as our main fuel source, right? So of the macronutrients, so we've got fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. So the lower we exercise, lower intensity, the more dietary fat our body is likely to burn. As that intensity goes up, we go into what we call the glycolytic energy system, which relies on glucose, sugars, or carbohydrates. Now, I'm not aware of any sport that exclusively stays low intensity. Pretty much all sports have ebb and flows to them. You know, you may be drawn back at some point, you may need to explode at other points. So pretty much all activity needs carbohydrates as its main energy source, because you can go through on a low carb diet, you can go through on a high fat diet, and there's research to show that your time to exhaustion, so how long you can exercise for, is actually slightly increased on a low carb diet. But once again, no sport is based off of somebody doing it until they're exhausted. It's competing at the highest level,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So in order to get the most out of that, carbohydrates. So we are approaching the exercise session, we consider, have I got full glycogen stores? If I don't, I need to get some carbohydrates into my system to fuel that energy, to fuel that training session. Simple rule of thumb, generally speaking, most people can burn through about 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour of training. So if you're only training for an hour, which most recreational exercisers or, mixed martial arts athletes, combat athletes aren't going to be training any longer than that, it may go to 90 minutes. You're looking at about 30 grams or so of carbohydrates to get into your system to fuel that training session. Now, the type of carbohydrates, generally speaking, is almost the opposite of the type of carbs that you need to be eating away from training. So generally, your day-to-day life, you want carbohydrates that have a very slow digestion time, are quite fibrous, because they're going to slowly burn through your system. They're going to take a long time to digest, and they're going to keep you full.
Such as
your fruits and vegetables, your kind of your complex carbohydrates, grains, things like that. They have a very slow, what we call gastric emptying time, which means, so you chew your food up, goes down into your stomach, and the gastric emptying time is how quickly it gets through that wall of your stomach. So the acids break it down. Once it's past that stage, that's when it can be incorporated into like muscular contraction and helping you, breathe more efficiently and things like that. So we don't want a slow gastric emptying time when we're fueling our training. We want quick. So sugary carbohydrates actually become more important during the pre-workout time. So roughly 30 grams of carbohydrates eaten about 60 minutes or so before a training session. A nice quick gastric emptying time, a little bit of sugar floating through the system. For the majority of people, we'll get them through most training sessions.
Okay.
If it goes to like, we're talking 2, 3, 4 hour long training sessions, which endurance athletes, although we work with a few, they're not our main clientele. The moment the training sessions goes longer than that, you would have to increase your carbohydrate intake. But for most people, a small carb-based snack, and then post-workout, it's essentially you want to replenish everything that you've just lost.
It's like you've lost fuel.
Exactly. So your muscle glycogen. So post-workout, again, carbohydrates are important, but we also then focus on the importance of protein, because one of the things that happens when you exercise is you basically break down proteins, right? So you have protein synthesis, which is like how much protein you're making in your body during the day, and you have protein breakdown, and the two are always ebbing and flowing. So you're breaking protein down, you're synthesizing it. Exercising is a form of breakdown. That's what you do when you train with weights or when you spar or whatever. Your body breaks down these proteins, so it needs to rebuild them post-exercise. So we then go to a carb and protein mix post-training.
Okay.
And we basically keep fats away from that workout window. All your dietary fat gets eaten the majority of the other times of the day.
Wow. Okay. So my pattern has always been 2 hours before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite a big smoothie.
Yep.
And I had it with loads of peanut butter,
Mm-hmm.
almond butter, honey, cocoa milk,
Yep.
and all sorts of fruit. And that usually I feel really, really strong throughout the training. I can see from the other people I train with that I can take it slightly further.
Mm-hmm.
Than the rest of the guys, but it's I actually this Polish UFC fighter Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Yeah.
She basically said it: 1 egg, half an avocado, banana, whatever, grapes, kiwi with skin on, and then some almond butter, honey. Mix it up 2 hours before, and she drinks something like this before a fight as well, a couple hours before a fight. But what about a fight?
Yeah, so I guess it depends.
Because it will be literally 10 minutes maximum. So it's not like an hour and a half.
Oh, so the fight itself. Yeah, absolutely.
The fight itself.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's going to depend on the conditions that are present with weight cutting. So if a fighter has done a really, really, really hard weight cut and they're at like day before weigh-ins and they've got all this time to replenish, the complexity of nutrition goes up quite a bit. But if we're talking like same day weigh-in or even like some of the conditions that are in grappling where you just literally get on the scales and then go compete, you've got like very little time to think about it. So my approach is like if I've done a weight cut with a fighter, which maybe we can talk about that as like a separate thing, I'll go through the replenishment process, and once I have them basically back to 100% from a weight capacity perspective, I almost try to effectively not screw it up from like the weight cut through to the fight time, because there's a huge amount of variables for a competitive fighter that are going to be present that aren't present in normal day-to-day life. Things like how nervous they are, how hyped up they are, and food. Like if you put the wrong thing in an athlete's stomach, it can be something that can almost tip them over the edge. Like if they're not used to a certain type of food or a certain supplement, they can get a lot of stomach upset, because they might be, adrenaline's quite high, isn't it?
I've seen it too many times, like backstage, where people kind of, they've done that weigh-in, and sometimes that almost feels like the fight itself, especially if you're in a tough weigh-in. Yeah. They've weighed in and they're straight in whatever the local restaurant is, and they think, I've got to refuel. and it looks like some crazy meal,
Exactly.
and then they're sitting
Greg's.
in the backstage. Yeah, absolutely. But they're sitting backstage, feeling awful, feeling full, and also I find like a lot of the time, people can definitely be on a level of restriction during a fight camp, especially if they're cutting weight, and it's suddenly gone from this kind of like calorie dense but low calorie food or whatever. Sorry, low calorie food but like quite dense in terms of its volume, to suddenly sugary food, fast food. They're kind of just getting these calories in. And stomach upset,
Literally.
plus the adrenaline, plus anything else going on can cause serious problems.
Yeah. So essentially, all the same things that I just spoke about with normal training, once the fighter's like been replenished and they've got all their weight back to the point, I just say like, what foods are you familiar with? What foods do you enjoy? Whether it's just a simple piece of fruit or a snack bar or something like that. And as long as they've got, once again, some carbohydrates present in their system, maybe if I've got experience working with a certain athlete and they're like quite tolerant to what we call like ergogenic supplements, like caffeine and things like that, or pre-workouts and type things like that, and they enjoy using them, we might do something like that if they're feeling a bit low on energy. So we almost do like a plan A, plan B, plan C scenario, because sometimes they might be backstage and they're like, I am psyched for this and I don't need anything. And then other times they'll be like, I just can't get myself up. Like I feel, why do I feel so lethargic? So I'm like, if that's plan B, like here's a caffeine supplement we can do, or here's this that we can maybe do. So it's like plan A, plan B, plan C, but I never overdo it is the point, because the hard work's already done at that point. Yeah. Like nobody is going to win a fight based off of what they ate before the fight. Do you know what I mean? It's going to be, don't screw it up. Like basically get them to a point where they've got good energy levels. And like my job as a nutritionist is done then. If I overdo it and I try to do too much, I'm like, eat these 10 foods and this supplement and that, it's another variable that athlete has to think about.
And it's extra headspace for them as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Matt's done quite a few of my weight cuts and things like that, and the one thing that comes out of it is like simplistic, but obviously very intelligent, and also it just takes the stress away from me. I just have to follow ABC. It's very simple. Whereas if I was being told 20 different things to do whilst I'm trying to think about my competition and everything else, suddenly I'm like, oh no, I didn't weigh that correctly, or I forgot this special ingredient, and it's stress that you don't need, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a benefit of having someone like Matt. Because
unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean all the top athletes, they have strength and conditioning coach, and they've got nutritionists, and they've got physio as well if they have an injury. Oh my god! But we I have to do everything myself.
We are seeing it
it's
more,
all about
aren't we?
DIY research. Reading articles. Listening to podcasts, and trying to
for sure.
Do it yourself.
We do have to hard sell people on nutrition though, don't we? Because it still can be, especially with athletes who are quite hard nosed, and maybe they're maybe not willing to admit that they need the help with the diet side of things, because for whatever reason that there's always sort of a stigma attached to it. Like I'm happy to reach out to somebody to like show me how to lift weights, but somebody telling me like what things I should eat or not is almost like they feel like they should know that because they're an athlete. Like I've got this, I know all this, like I've read this and I've done that, and I'm like, I can bring things to the table that you've probably even never thought about. However, even if I teach you nothing about nutrition, I'm confident that I will, but even if I teach you nothing, having somebody who's objective about what to do and what not to do is so valuable. Huge. Because like to your point, we were talking before we started recording about like rest days and whatnot. And a lot of like our work with athletes is we spend as much time telling them what not to do as we do telling them what to do.
I definitely spend more time pulling them back.
Yeah, 100%. Take your foot off the pedal. You don't need to do so much.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
And nutrition's the same. It's sort of like if you've got somebody there that's going to help you not overthink it, it's just going to give you clear guidelines. There doesn't need to be like a stigma about the fact that you maybe don't know what you're doing. Like it's just somebody there, that's there to help you. So
yeah, absolutely. Let's move to fitness for a little bit, because since I started kickboxing, and it must have been about five years ago, I haven't lifted any sort of weight. Am I doing the right thing, considering I want to get to the best that I can be, or is it what I'm doing now enough? So push-ups, pull-ups, sparring, some strength and conditioning, but no weights.
So I think the way that I usually approach it is that I think that skill formulates the bottom of the pyramid. So for any combat athlete, our actual technical skill is the most important attribute. And I always like to see someone that's a fighter spending most of their time kind of honing that skill. And I think if you take too much time away from that and concentrate on other areas, you could be doing yourself a disservice. But if we assume that skill, we put enough time into skill, I find that as we move up to the next kind of level, then attributes are very important. And that could be a range of attributes. So things like our strength, our power, our cardio conditioning, mobility, flexibility. And you can even include things like balance and stuff in there as well. There are some variances between different combat sports as well. So some things may be more or less important in striking than grappling, depending on, the type of style that you do. But once the skill is kind of out of the way, what I assume is that, for someone like yourself or anyone that's at a competitive level, like you're a skillful martial artist, you're going to be fighting a skillful martial artist. The chance of a mismatch becomes like less and less likely as you move up, So we're going to assume that they're two skilled athletes. That's when I feel attributes play a big role. So I find that being strong, being fit, being athletic is then really, really important. One thing that really sticks in my mind as well is that I tend to lean into strength being possibly the most important attribute, or at least definitely a contender for it. And I'm sure you probably kind of had this yourself where you're at competitions. I very rarely had a fighter come off a mat or come out between rounds and go, that guy's really fit, or that guy's really flexible, man. He goes, that guy's strong. I always heard, that guy's strong. Like he fucking punches hard, or I can't get him off me. And strength basically can really sap other attributes. So, if you've grappled with somebody that's very, very strong, or you've sparred with someone that's very strong, it can take the cardio out of you. It can definitely kind of limit your ability to move, your speed, your flexibility. So although they're all important, I do find strength can be incredibly important. So whether you use weights or not, I do think some type of training, resistance training of some nature to improve your overall physical strength, power, is important. I think training only body weight is good up to a point. So I find like actually for a fighter and for general public really, the important thing with training body weight is that it kind of shows you what you can do with your own body. Can you actually move your own body through space? Can you do a push up? Can you do a pull up? And I think they're good indications that your body composition is probably quite strong. So if you can do say 10 good push ups or 10 good pull ups, your muscle to fat ratio is probably good. Your overall strength is probably good as well. Where I think sort of pure bodyweight training can get let down is that sometimes it can be hard to progress. If you can hit 10 pull-ups, sometimes getting that 11th, 12th rep can be quite difficult week to week. It may be harder to incrementally increase things. The other thing I find as well is that you can be limited until you start to either get to quite an advanced level of bodyweight training or you incorporate equipment. So there are elements I really like to include with general public and with fighters in terms of bodyweight. I think it teaches great movement in a lot of ways. But say, for example, one thing that normally sticks out in my head is lower body training, for example. So I have an average person or even a fighter, they can do a squat, they can do some type of lower body plyometric. And then we go to single leg work. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. I definitely think single leg work has good carryover into martial arts because we're normally in split stance. But after you get to that point, how do I progress it? It can be really, really difficult. So I can do, not me personally, maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I've got X person, they can do 20 pistol squats off each leg. That's great. That's a good example of strength. What do I do now? 25, 50? At some point, bringing in weight to that exercise starts to make sense, So I think with the bonus of weight training is that it's very easy to progress, it's very easy to track, and it does allow us to train effectively. The learning curve is quite low compared to other types of training, especially if we use fairly conventional weight training as well. So I think that's got a pro, although what I try to do, especially with combat athletes, is I try not to marry myself to any one training system. So I think if you've got people that swear by powerlifting that aren't powerlifters, and you've got people that swear by calisthenics that aren't calisthenics practitioners, they're fighters first. So what I try to do, and similarly I think, it's an important thing to do if you want to be like a holistic martial artist, is take the things that work well from the various systems and look at combining them together. That's a little bit of a minefield, but that's where coaching comes in. I've definitely trained a lot in various different systems. We've worked with people that are figure competitors. We've worked with people that train in strongman up to quite a high level. And we've worked with powerlifters as well as combat athletes. And I think there's elements of all of those systems that can be really, really useful. I think as soon as you kind of narrow yourself down to, say for example, I'm only going to train body weight, you could be missing out on some absolute gold with weight training. But similarly, if all I concentrate are on the big three powerlifting lifts, I could be missing some amazing movements from bodyweight training that could also enhance my game as well.
So how often would you lift? Would it be just a part of like a general training regime?
So I think the minimum I would recommend for somebody that's already like a kind of a fighter that's training relatively regularly is twice a week. And I've seen amazing progress on twice a week when it's programmed correctly. We have to remember that people that are training primarily as a combat athlete may not have huge aspirations in terms of, you know, a bodybuilding goal or a strength target.
Yeah.
What the purpose of that session should be is really to back up their skills on the mat or in the cage or in the ring. So I think we can kind of get pulled into kind of the ideas of strength sports and things like that. So for example, being strong, say in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is a lot lower bar than being strong in powerlifting. You know, if you take an 80 kilo BJJ practitioner, even at an elite level, there's a lot of research to suggest, for example, like a 2.5 times bodyweight deadlift would probably put you in the 1% at an elite level, okay? And that's a really great deadlift unless you're a powerlifter. You know, you're going to see people in powerlifting pull way, way above that. But at a certain point, there's diminishing returns. So twice a week is great. 3 times a week, cool as well. I think depending on the athlete's schedule, this is where we get into that issue we talked about before, this overtraining, under-recovering.
Where do you place everything?
Yeah.
And especially, I think it comes down to, like, I work with people that are at a low recreational level. Like, they might want to go out and do a competition on a weekend every now and again. So they may also, you know, want to look good on the beach. So they may actually, in a random way, do more training in the gym because they have less high, you know, aspirational goals in terms of their competition. At the other end of the spectrum, I'm lucky enough to work with people that are right at the top level in terms of some of the combat sports where their training schedules look crazy, and fitting in 2 weight training sessions may realistically be all that they can do, and adding any more may actually be detrimental to their overall progress rather than actually enhance it.
But I think you hit the nail on the head there especially with time, especially for amateur fighters, because you know you work, you have family, and because I usually train every day, so I have to say, you know, I come back from work, hi kids, something to eat, bye family, I'm off. Yeah. And usually I say I'll be at 7 o'clock, and I'm at 9 or 10 because I had to stay an hour longer, or someone offered, Remi, do you mind staying sparring for a little bit longer? Yeah, go on. So it's so hard to mix and match all of these, because you would potentially recommend that I do, you know, lifting twice a week, and then maybe a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and suddenly the week.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the thing is as well, even at an amateur level now, the standard is high.
Yes,
very high.
Oh yeah.
You know, so I think, you know, I see a lot of amateurs that schedules look pretty close to what a pro schedule looks like. Like you say, most amateurs train almost every day. Yeah. So especially if you want to go out and actually compete, you know. There's like a term that was used in endurance training quite a lot, which is complete or compete. So it's the idea of, like, a lot of people do a half marathon. You probably know somebody that's done one, but how many people do you know that's won one? You know, so some people are just there to do it, and more power to them. But some people are like, no, I'm going to win it. You know, so there's some people that come training because they enjoy training, and like they may roll out into a low-level competition. But as you start moving up that tree, even at amateur level, you're like, I want to win a competition. I want to win a title. I want to win a national title, and so on. It starts to look more and more like pro training.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Our assessment of like where an athlete falls on that spectrum would like inform how we coach them, basically.
Absolutely.
You know, is that somebody that's just going to be here recreationally and fancies doing a competition every once in a while to take it off the bucket list, or are we looking at somebody here who actually wants to work their way up the ranks? You know.
Yeah, and you know, with me, I've got this, like I guess fighter, like this obsessive mindset, and once I've won my you know, ISK belt, I just got more hungry for more.
Yeah. And we're really lucky because even in our general population clients, we work with like I think really highly motivated people, and that's one thing that's really in common. They set big targets and big goals, and when they reach them, they move the goalpost. Yeah. I think it's a positive thing. I think it is positive, but it's almost like that constant self-improvement. So, you know, you really set those targets, you're really happy to reach it, but you think, well, I've done this.
Yeah. And
maybe I can do a bit more.
For sure. And it's actually one of the reasons why we encourage people to be doing training modalities and ways of eating to reach those goals that they actually enjoy. Because we know it's fairly well established. So like that's like an outcome goal, right? You can set a goal that you want to achieve, and then probably you're going to then move the goalpost further away to your next goal. And although that can be quite a positive thing, if you're doing ways and means of training and eating that you absolutely hate to get there, you can almost get to this point where you're like, what am I actually doing here? Like, I'm never happy, and I'm also not enjoying what I'm doing. There's like quite a fascinating thing that they've documented with gold medal winners in Olympics, where they've actually shown that like certain people who have trained all their life, like from a young age, to walk all the way to the Olympics, get a gold medal, and they've actually had almost this like post-depression that has sunk in afterwards, because they're like, I've worked my entire life to do this. I thought I'd feel a certain way afterwards, but like it's actually been a big letdown. Like I've ticked that box, and what was all those years for? And maybe that speaks to the fact that they've been doing such an extreme version of like training and eating that they didn't enjoy to work to that one singular goal. They reached it and they're like, oh, awesome, I've got a gold medal. Now what do I do?
It's similar to musicians coming back, returning from massive tours. They've got this huge calm down, and a lot of people, fall into the depression, and there's so many, suicides as well, because you had this sort of hype and adrenaline rush for 3-4 weeks, drinking, partying. You're the center of attention. Suddenly you go home. You're sitting in your bedroom watching the telly, Coronation, whatever, Emmerdale, and that's it.
Yeah, that's the thing. And if you have a way to reach your goal that is providing you some form of enjoyment and is actually a positive thing in your life, if you don't reach the destination, at least you enjoyed the ride. As cheesy as that may sound, it's like I'm still doing a form. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've learned a lot from this. I've really enjoyed learning about new forms of training. Like my diet was like really improved. Like I'll have it all the time where I'll start working with a client, and primarily in a consultation, I'll sort of ask them, what do you want to achieve? And of course, it's usually based on an outcome. It's like, I want to lose a certain amount of weight or whatever. And actually, that the longer we go through the process, they may achieve it, they may not, but that goal actually gets further and further to the back of their mind as to what's important. They become more focused on the fact that actually this week I've really improved my relationship with food, or I felt like I wanted to order a takeaway and I didn't, and that's a really big win for me. So it's actually based off of the process that somebody's doing rather than the outcome. The outcome just kind of becomes a side effect of that.
And even if they don't reach their goal, it's still a win-win, because at least they had a lovely process of, training, getting to know you, so they had some recommendation of, diet and things like this. Yeah. So it's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the first time I mentioned diet. I had a question about diet as well. I found out that what it means. I didn't know what diet meant. Apparently it means, from Greek, style of life, way of life.
Yeah.
So it was literally food industry turned it upside down and said, no, diet is something very, very hard to do and actually unachievable. Here's this big massive chocolate bar that's just by where you have to pay for all your food. You can just reach it and chuck it in your carry bag.
Yeah, I think it's a term that sometimes we feel like to qualify with people. When we talk about
all the time,
we'll be using this diet. They think like diet. Like no, not a lettuce leaf and a glass of water. Like it's just a word, but it does have those connotations.
100%. So what you just described is perfect. Like the actual overall umbrella term for diet is descriptive of the way we eat, right? And the way we eat encompasses how we think about food. Like, how do you eat in all different scenarios? So how do you eat when you're at home with your family? How do you eat when you're with your friends? How do you eat when you're on your own? That is your diet. It's not something that you start and then 12 weeks later you finish and you've got all these rules and these start-stop things, because like if somebody thinks that way, they've almost already lost. Because if somebody comes to me for a consultation and they tell me about the way they're currently eating and it's not working for them and they're unhappy with their body, their health's declining, I'm like, so what we need to change is your normal, right? So how do you eat when you're just in your normal day-to-day life? That's what we need to change. If I put you on a diet for 12 weeks that's got this list of rules and these foods that you need to avoid, you could probably, if you've got incredibly high willpower and self-discipline, follow it. But the moment that stop comes in, your normal is going to return and you've almost like learnt nothing.
Yeah.
So actual education from a kind of an overarching principle perspective needs to be there the whole way through. And yeah, you're right that diet is not this word that's kind of been adopted by by the industries that we have these days of like, here's the latest thing, here's the latest fad. Unfortunately, it has been, but that's not what we do, and that's not really the message that I ever have for people. It's how you eat food normally, the way you think about food and all that sort of thing.
Now, from you, Tom, from point of view of a competitor, and then from you, Matt, as a nutritionist, is there any food you wouldn't recommend that your students touch?
Yes. Don't talk about mayonnaise.
You know what? I hate mayonnaise.
We're on the same page, right?
I hate it.
I love mayonnaise. I love mayonnaise if it's got garlic in it. I don't like normal mayonnaise.
Whenever we go to, because I've got a sister in Amsterdam. Apparently,
oh man, apparently, chips, right?
I've never had it, but apparently they have the best mayonnaise in the world.
Because you can't have the best mayonnaise.
It's an oxymoron. It doesn't exist.
Yeah. So is there a type of food that you would basically tell to your 5-year students, no, don't even go near it, or is it a myth?
Yeah. So I guess the way I would approach that is we can talk about it from like a physiological perspective and then a behavioral perspective. So physiologically, in terms of like the harm that a single food may cause the human body, there's basically no food that anybody should avoid unless they are medically, intolerant to it, they're allergic to it, and they'll know about that, right? So putting like medical allergies aside, there's pretty much nothing that the body is not capable of dealing with in isolation. So, we have more nutritious foods and less nutritious foods. So certainly more nutritious foods should make up the predominance of somebody's diet.
Okay.
They can have less nutritious foods every now and again. But I would never say to somebody, don't ever eat that, because there is also like a reverse psychology element to it where some people might actually think about that food even more. Mm-hmm. It's almost become like a forbidden fruit taboo sort of thing. So physiologically, no, there's nothing somebody should avoid. But behaviorally, there are certain instances where I would put, maybe rules in place or whatever that I would tell a client avoid that, because certain people have almost like trigger foods where if it's in the house and they're trying to be quite disciplined, like you're not going to eat one of them, you're going to eat 10 of them. Yeah. So to my point about setting up your food environment, a very simple thing is don't buy those foods. Like I don't need to be a nutritionist to tell you that, but maybe it's almost like a light bulb moment for some people in that there are certain foods that people will know deep down that they just cannot moderate. Mm-hmm.
It's like this should be a job for some sort of behavioral psychologist, really, rather than
well, the two things overlap massively.
Absolutely.
The information that I read is always deeply rooted in nutrition science, but it's also rooted in behavior and psychology and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, if I've got a good relationship with a client and they're happy to kind of open up to me more about their food behaviors, and they sort of said like maybe they almost had like a semi-binge eating moment on a certain food, I kind of explained to them that we've got to a point where that food group or that type of food has got quite a negative hold over you. So it's time to put systems in place that make you avoid that.
You sometimes see it with, like, one other instance that I find that as well is sometimes with fighters during fight camp as well. Like, in theory, they can kind of fit in anything if they balance it well, but it almost takes them out of the mindset that they want to be in, and we don't want them, like, kind of, living something like a lifestyle that they can't kind of maintain for that sort of time period. But sometimes including certain foods that they see as like a cheap food or like a luxury food can kind of take them out of the mindset that they want to stay in. So I've had that sometimes with people kind of,
definitely.
They find like if they sort of eat a certain type of food, they slide into a certain type of behavior, a certain type of relationship with training, which is negative to their overall outcome. Yeah. But yeah, other than that, really, we try and keep everything on the table, don't we?
Literally. Pretty much, yeah. We don't, I've never been somebody that vilifies foods, and I think something that the diet culture, diet industry is quite, like that they do it all the time where they put articles out which are based around negativity. So there's this bias, again, in I guess it's like advertising world and whatnot, where people know that a negative headline will get more clicks than a positive headline. Mm-hmm. So 2 separate articles, one that's 10 foods you should avoid and one that's 10 foods you should eat. People are more likely to click on the 10 foods you should avoid. And advertisers and bloggers and people with no qualifications at all to even talk about nutrition know this, and they know that it's going to get clicks. So what happens is people start to fear food. They start to become more confused because the list that says avoid one week, those foods are then on the list to eat the next week. People become more confused. So really, really zooming out and saying, actually, no such thing as good and bad. There's more nutritious and less nutritious. Everything can have its place. But I'm going to show you, maybe better times to eat certain foods and not. actually it's a lot more of a moderate approach. It doesn't create so much dysfunction and sort of poor relationships with food. So.
See, I knew you were going to say that. Because not that long ago you posted around Easter a photograph with Big Easter.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
I've got a weird relationship with chocolate and alcohol.
Yeah.
I think that's these two.
Super common.
Yeah. It's just, after tough sparring session, there's nothing better than, after you had a shower, just sit down on your sofa and have one cold beer. Oh.
Yeah.
But it's, doesn't matter if you go for a normal beer or like skinny lager or.
Not particularly. I mean, if we're being like if we're being super detail orientated, I wouldn't necessarily say that beer or alcohol post training is good, because it does inhibit some of the adaptations you get from training. So it's the one thing with alcohol intake is I say for people to have it quite far away from the workout window, because there's research to show that it impairs protein synthesis. So like we spoke about before, when you break proteins down, you want to rebuild them. If you go and drink a load of alcohol, because basically what alcohol does is the body treats it almost like a poison in that it metabolizes it the quickest over every other substrate that you've eaten. So if you eat a mixed meal and then you drink alcohol afterwards, the body will immediately start burning the alcohol because it needs to get it out of its system, because it obviously to a point is toxic. You can't have a certain amount of alcohol until you can no longer function. So in terms of the body actually being able to metabolize protein and break it down, it will impair protein synthesis. So that's like a very, very detail oriented thing. But if somebody wants to have like a night out in the pub or whatever, like train in the AM and go do it in the PM. Like don't drink straight after your training session.
Okay.
I think there's definitely a heavy overarching lifestyle factor thing though as well, isn't there? Like where like we're talking about the optimal, like optimizing somebody to like the nth degree, but as you move further away from maybe needing to be 100% optimal, like I say, the difference between a high level pro and like a recreational athlete, the importance of certain elements become like, if that really works for you and it keeps you adherent to the rest of your nutrition, the rest of your training, it makes you feel happy, makes you feel relaxed, helps with your recovery or whatever, that may overall have more precedence over being optimal. Whereas if we're training with someone that's looking at high level title fight, there may be more restrictions or more advice that we're like, that might make a difference to you.
Exactly.
That 1% might be the difference, especially as I say, once we talk about skills being matched, attributes being matched, mindset being matched, the kind of minutiae become more important.
It's a game of inches.
Absolutely.
It's the same way you described the weight training in a pyramid. It's like the pyramid of importance. What's most important is at the bottom, least important is at the top. For your average person, recreational exercise or somebody that wants to stay in shape, probably it's going to be more important to them to be able to go out and have a drink after their training. Like that's actually going to be lower down in the pyramid, because it allows them to feel like this is like an all-encompassing lifestyle. Whereas somebody who's like the 1% of the 1% who wants to be like the best athlete they could possibly be, if I say, it impairs protein synthesis, it's going to be like, okay, that's like a really big thing for me. I'm going to move it because it's worth it for me to like feel like, even if it's not physiologically, like it can't even be proven under a microscope, the knowledge of an athlete that they're doing something that their competitor is not doing can be quite powerful. I avoided alcohol tonight and maybe my opponent had a drink, I've got the edge over that person, and it all plays into the psychology of it. So.
Yeah, I think it works for me. Whenever I have a training camp, I don't drink at all.
Yeah, well, that comes back to what I was saying about being in training camp. There are there's fighters there's one guy I always remember that would not eat cheesecake. I think they like cake, cheesecake, something like that. I think it was that, and they were like, I don't have it at fight camp, just because that reminds me of being on normal life and normal recreation. Now I'm in a fight camp, and so whether it could fit into the diet or not was irrelevant. It was like, does that take you out of the mindset you want to be in? So I get that.
It's like the famous Habib with his tiramisu, the one that ruined that fight like for the fourth time or whatever. And he was obviously like no tiramisu until I weighed in, and then
and that's a nice reward as well after you've weighed in. I have to say I've never had any problems with weigh-ins, because I always fight at my natural weight. So I might cut like 1 kilogram, which is nothing, because I can lose 2.5 kilograms in like really hard
sparring or whatever.
Yeah. So that's absolutely fine. But let's talk about weight a little bit, because we are in this really, really weird times when people are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's just absolutely crazy. I found out from World Health Organization we are third, so UK is third in Europe as far as obesity is considered. Do you think that there are any positive signs that there is some sort of turning point, or do you think we've reached the point of no return?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that we haven't, because I'm somebody that's sort of very much a glass half full type personality, and if I thought that way, I think it would bleed into my own coaching of like, what is even the point here? So I'm very much somebody that would like to believe that we haven't gone past that point, but it's going to be very, very difficult to solve, I feel, because of how many variables play into somebody becoming morbidly obese. And so the way that I think about this is, because I get so much success working with people one-to-one, I almost feel like everybody who struggles with their weight should have somebody like myself who's there working with them. Obviously that's not possible or feasible, but these sort of nationwide approaches that the government rolls out often fail because there's no personalization, there's no individualization to them, and they almost feel like a statistic, and they feel like, oh, I'm past the point of help here, so what's the point? If there were more people, and I would love to get to a point where maybe the government, it actually is part of their remit to employ people like myself to go in and work with people one-to-one. People need that, like, okay, I've got somebody in my corner who understands me, who's actually talking to me about why I got this way in the first place. Because until we're able to get to that point where we treat people as individuals rather than as statistics, it's going to be very difficult to solve it, I feel.
I definitely think there's a really strong correlation between people that work, the closer they're working with you and I intently, the faster their results come. I think the faster they kind of start changing their mindset, and you do see a ripple effect in terms of like their partner, their kids, they all benefit from it. The further they're removed, they just work with me, they just work with you, they work with us less frequently, you can see the results are slower. That tends to lead to less motivation, less ripple effect. But one of the things I think is interesting to that point is that, unfortunately, I think there's a really skewed perception of like what overweight and obese is now because of how prevalent it is. So, I had somebody ask in our group, I won't throw out names, but they put up their statistics and they're like, oh, I'm at, this BMI and this body fat, like where am I at? And the guy looks okay, it doesn't look majorly out of shape, but it was obese by the statistics. But you could probably walk down the street and see 10 people in 10 minutes bigger than the guy in question. So you start to think, I'm kind of okay because that guy's okay and this guy's okay, or this girl's okay. So the barrier for where people maybe become aware that they're overweight is actually quite high. And it's really difficult because it's a very sensitive subject, and it's something that we talk about a lot. Like people are very, like, obviously their emotions are very tied to their weight, and terms like fat or whatever starts to have like really super negative connotations for people. But the issue is that because the obesity is so prevalent, it becomes part of the norm. So it's difficult to change that perspective on like a nationwide scale. It is very hard, and the most successful way that we've found is in that one-to-one, where you can talk to somebody and get to the root of it. And actually, sometimes it's a wake-up call for people. They come in and they have some various measurements taken, maybe their BMI, their body fat, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize I was this. And what's normal? Oh, that's normal, or that's average, or that's healthy. Whereas before, because they're maybe surrounded by people that are similar body composition, similar lifestyle, it kind of is part of their norm.
I wish we were able to catch more people before they get to that point of no return, because unfortunately with stuff to do with people's health, there isn't a big enough drive for the people that need the help to get the help until it's too late, until the wheels fall off, and it's almost like, I'll do something about it. And I'm sure on a smaller scale people can relate to this when they feel like a niggling injury or something, and they're like, I won't go to the doctor, I won't sort it out, and like until you break, and then you're like, okay, maybe I'll look into this now,
because nothing hurts.
Nothing
there isn't
hurts,
a massive wound,
nothing's wrong with me immediately. And they'll get to the point where they're I'm okay, now I know I'm not okay because now I'm in hospital. And I wish that more people were able to be caught before that happens. And I mean, it takes somebody. It almost takes an overlap of like people like us and people in the fitness world. You don't have to be a qualified coach. Just somebody, a friend or a family member, to sort of say, do you fancy coming along with me to a class or whatever, and to meet the right people. Like, it's just something as small as that can change somebody's entire life before it gets too late.
Yeah.
Well,
I was going to say something that I heard from a doctor on a podcast, funny enough, that he said that he wishes he could change in terms of how the health service is set up. As he said, he feels like the focus is on preventing death rather than promoting health. So the idea is, we can give you this drug that will, keep you alive longer, or we can put you in this wheelchair so you can move around and you don't, sit in that chair and die essentially, rather than going upstream and hitting these things, like you say, early on, dealing with like the both physiological and mental health kind of concerns around body weight. So it's like this real downstream. You say you hit the hospital with a serious illness, and it's like, okay, we have drugs for that, we have surgery for that. Whereas like right up here somewhere, nutrition and exercise or a small lifestyle change may have had a massive downstream effect. And like that really stuck with me, that comment. I was like, wow, that's powerful.
That's absolutely true. What really is heartbreaking for me is seeing overweight kids. And I think that the government must step in and give kids education about food and about their lifestyle, about diet in this original Greek meaning, way of life, style of life, so they can have a good relationship with food, and they can make wise choices of what they need to eat, what their body really needs, rather than 100%. what looks good on the ad.
I mean, we learn all manner of useless things in school, things that we're never going to use in our entire life, but we don't learn something as fundamental as nutrition, and it's just not taught. There's subjects around food, but the actual basics of food, it doesn't need to be super complicated at that age, but it does need to be from the ground level up, because you become the sum total of your habits, and oftentimes your habits begin at childhood, don't they? And somebody who is overweight from childhood is very likely to become an overweight adult if they're not caught.
And you know what? I think it's absolutely ridiculous to see vending machines in schools, with Snickers, Mars bars, and all these fizzy drinks. I think this should be legal. But again, lobbying and these food.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's one thing that you've seen out of this whole COVID-19 kind of crisis is massive government intervention. You can only exercise and leave your house for 1 hour. You can't go here. You can go there. So unilaterally, they can do something if they want to.
They choose not to.
And the whole guise of the COVID-19 thing is health. We're going to keep you healthier. We're going to make sure that you are safe. So it is definitely possible to roll it out if you wanted to roll it out and address obesity either in childhood or across the whole nation. But it needs that back and that drive to do it.
Yeah, I remember watching Jamie Oliver in America when he tried to introduce all these healthy foods. He was receiving death threats from parents. How dare you, taking away my burgers and whatever they were eating there.
I think there's a certain amount of parents almost using food as like a pacifier for children as well.
Absolutely.
They're almost saying, don't take away those foods, because it's like taking away my kid's iPad almost. It's like those foods are what I give them to quieten them down, and if I try to give them vegetables, they're just gonna they're gonna scream the place down and whatnot. So it's almost the easier way, rather than starting with an education of let's try and overcome that hump of maybe my child doesn't like vegetables, and just try and work with them to a point where they're a little bit more inclined to want to eat that. Just give them the it was turkey Twizzlers, wasn't it? It was famous. Jamie Oliver, when he was doing it in the UK, it was like he was trying to outlaw turkey Twizzlers. But I think from a parent perspective as well, there's that fear of, if my child doesn't have access to these types of foods that I know they're responsive to, that it's going to send them mad. So
it's control. It's terrible. It's terrible. I'm quite lucky because my kids love healthy food, and I'm quite strict as well. But I eat, I told you I like chocolate and cakes. But what I try and do, I try not to buy it. I try to bake it. So I control how much sugar, how much whatever I put in it, so it's slightly healthier. But I do it quite regularly.
Good.
Twice a week, maybe. I bake. I'm a pretty good baker, actually. So we mentioned this sort of image of obese person, because I am a stalker on social media, so so I did see your post about the magazine cover. What do you think about it?
So that particular
magazine?
Yeah.
Because it was a huge controversy, and then there was. It was everywhere on
for sure.
on TV. And
there's so many different angles. There's so many different things that annoys me about the way that was interpreted. So one of the main things that kind of got under my skin a little bit was how quick people had a knee-jerk reaction to it. So many people drew a conclusion about what that magazine cover meant without even actually reading the article behind it, which to me, like, if you do that, you've already ruled yourself out of the conversation. Yeah. I don't think you should ever have an informed opinion if you're not willing to put the time in to read. It's like saying that you've watched a movie trailer and you automatically know that the movie's crap. Yeah. You know, like, you need to go and read what those people are saying that's behind the article. So that speaks to me as, like, you know, the people who made that front cover, they know what they're doing. They put a purposely obscure wording, so it was a lady who was overweight in workout clothing, and it just said this is healthy, and it was part of a larger magazine rollout, and it was all to do with people who don't fit the fitness mold, basically. So we had Ellie, I forgot her surname, but she's an Olympic swimmer, Paralympic swimmer, and a couple of other ladies as well, and basically it was like, you can go and do fitness, you can be, you know, you can work out no matter what you look like, no matter what your shape or size is. Fitness is open to everything.
And you can still feel great.
Still feel good, yeah, exactly. So, but they put this is healthy because they knew exactly what they were doing.
It's
they knew,
isn't it?
Yeah, they knew that it would get, Piers Morgan would be all over it,
and it's
it would
viral.
be exactly. Of course it is. So my thing is, if you're not willing to go and see what those individuals are saying, you've ruled yourself out of the conversation completely. If you actually read the article, it was actually, for me, I was thinking to myself, I really hope this doesn't, because there's a line that gets crossed for somebody like myself who is a practitioner, is a nutritionist, but is also is compassionate towards people's struggles and wants health and fitness to be for everyone, but is also very sort of, I read science, and I'm very much, this is what the scientific practice says. And there's a line that gets drawn in these conversations where if somebody starts to misquote scientific fact about saying that, you know, it's healthy to be morbidly obese, that's where it crosses the line for me, and I can no longer be on board with that. So I was very much hoping that article wasn't that, and it wasn't at all. It was just a group of women saying, this is how exercise makes me feel. And the wording purposely was, this is healthy, meaning it's healthy for somebody to put workout clothing on and feel like they're part of it. Because for a lot of people, to kind of like loop back around to our previous conversation about catching somebody before their health declines, a big part of that is feeling like those people are represented. So representation is huge. So my thing is, pick anything that you've ever done in your life. It can be a hobby, an interest, whatever. I almost guarantee that one of the reasons why you started doing that was because you saw somebody who looked like you, spoke like you, represented you doing it, and thought, actually, I can do that. And until you see that, you can read and know all the information in the world, but you need something that connects with you. You need to feel like you're represented. And for the people who need the help the most, if they're not represented in fitness media, if fitness media looks like people with six packs and ripped all the time, they're thinking that's not a world that I belong in, and they're never going to get the help they need. So they need to be represented. So my thing was, read the article. The article was very positive. Now, if you still, after reading the article, think that this is promoting obesity, I would say that's more to do with your own inherent biases, your own sort of lack of compassion for the way somebody might feel about themselves, and just, you know, like, there's this terminology, fat phobia, right, which I think sometimes is used a bit out of context, but I understand the principle behind it is that some people, let's just face it, have discriminatory ideas about overweight people. They think they're just lazy slobs with no self-control. And my thing is, you can't be like, have this conversation like we're having now and be into fitness and whatnot, and then become irate the moment somebody who is overweight puts on workout clothing and works out. Because what do you want? Like, do you want to help people, or do you just want to have this like elitist mentality where fitness is only for the fit people?
Because that's what you see when you switch the TV on and you see an ad for a gym. You see all these really fit, slim people with abs, you know, beautiful hair, lovely makeup, you know, beautiful hair, and you feel I don't fit there. And especially if someone is overweight and has some issues with, you know, mental health, whether it's depression or just lack of belief and self-esteem, they will never, you know, pick up the phone or go and visit the gym.
In our conversations, that's a huge barrier for entry to actually get into the gym. Like, somebody that knows they want to do something, and, you know, I can talk them through why I think exercising and weight training, and it'll be like, can I do it at home? Can I? And not that they can't necessarily do it at home, but it's like, why do you want to do it at home? I didn't want to go in the gym. Why not? And this is why, because everyone will be looking at me, because they feel out of place. And Matt summarised it perfectly. It's reading the context of that article and knowing that it's not promoting obesity. We're never going to sit here and say, yeah, absolutely, you can be morbidly obese and it's perfectly healthy for you. But like exactly the point, everyone says, well, they should do something about it.
They are.
Yeah. They are. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
I had it before with people that somebody was complaining about like people in January going to the gym. They're like, they're always in the way. They didn't know what they're doing. I'm like, you were that guy, right? You were that girl. You came to the gym for the first time at one point, and now you're part of the furniture. But that person's taken step one. Okay.
I mean,
fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. There was something equally as similar along the same sort of topic a couple of years back that I posted about, which was in the Nike store, London Nike store, I think it was. They started rolling out mannequins for the fitness wear that they sold that were more in line with like the average female body, and it was to do with selling plus size workout clothing. And there was this sort of viral image of this like mannequin that didn't look like all the other mannequins. It wasn't like a stick like the normal mannequins. It was like a woman that sort of looked like your average woman, and they had plus size workout clothing on. And the image went viral for all the wrong reasons. Once again, people going, this is promoting obesity, things like this. And I'm like, people who are overweight need workout clothing. Manufacturers need to sell them workout clothing. It's not the fact that they're saying you should look like this. It's that we cater for you. Like, this is a world that you can be part of. Here's some clothing that's going to make you feel good, because we all know that like it's a hell of a lot easier to go into a gym if you feel good about yourself. Absolutely. Like if you like what you're wearing, like even like a good workout gear can like make you feel good. It's all part of the experience, isn't it? So somebody that's never felt represented and never had their size before sees all this workout clothing, and it's inherently a good thing. But of course, it got misrepresented. I think it's just a lot of it's just the foundation of like outrage baiting. The people know that people like to feel self-righteous and irate about things more than they like to actually help people.
Yeah, because I can only imagine what it feels like when you're slightly overweight, you're female, and you go into the gym with a few dozens of ripped guys. You must feel so uncomfortable and intimidated as well. And it's just, oh my God, that's not who I am. I don't want to be here. But how else can you get people like this to go into the gym and get healthier?
Yeah,
you need to cater for them.
Absolutely. They need to feel represented. Yeah, I mean we've also had it in our own practice, and I've read a lot about this as well, about advertising within the fitness world, and specifically before and after style photos. And you may have, let's say, like a certain target market that you're wanting to work with or wanting to help. But if that target market, like your advertising, only shows before and afters that are people that are like super ripped, although the average person might be really impressed by that, that's not going to get them to work with you as much as taking somebody who's 18 stone and bringing them down to 16 stone. Although that might not seem visually as impressive to sell the product, they're going to look at that and go, oh, that looks like me, and that looks like how I want to look. Yeah. So we hope as well as a company, and I think the wider fitness culture should be about this as well, is like encompass diversity in what you're doing, what you're advertising. Don't play into these sort of stereotypical cliches about what fitness is and isn't. Make it open to everybody, because the moment you do that, to loop back around to our conversation about trying to actually solve the obesity crisis, it's about getting people in the door in the first place. And if they don't feel represented, they're never gonna be in the door. So
absolutely, yeah. So let's encourage everyone to go to the gym.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Before we finish, because I'm really intrigued with the Grapple Machine. So I'm a newbie to the world of Jitsu. What sort of thing would you offer me as some sort of exercise regime, strength and conditioning for purely grappling?
For grappling. So if we're talking about BJJ specifically, there is a lot of isometric movements in BJJ, so basically resisting tension where there's no kind of concentric or eccentric movement. And it's a sport that takes part primarily on the floor as well. So it's different to other grappling arts like judo and wrestling, which kind of are done a lot in the standing position. And although there is a standing element to it, a lot of gyms don't even concentrate in the standing position. They start their rolling on the ground and stuff like that as well. So it's kind of different to quite a lot of other sports. It also has a lot of pull-based movements in it, especially if you're wearing gear or kimono, so you're doing a lot of gripping and pulling. So overall, I take the approach of, I think with any combat sport or with any kind of niche sport, the stuff that gets a lot of promotion is the really unorthodox type of training. I know that if I put up a very unorthodox exercise, say on Instagram, I get a lot more attention if I put up a squat. But I actually genuinely believe that the basis of all programs, similarly to nutrition, I guess, when we're talking about this, is like 80% of it really should be core movements of the body. So the way the body works. So things like a squat, a hinge, a push and a pull, those type of exercises, because they're making you overall, they're improving your strength, your mobility, your injury prevention, stuff like that. It makes you more robust as an individual. Then as we get down to the specifics of, say, the difference between a striking sport or a grappling sport, there may be certain exercises that are more or less important. In BJJ, grip is super important. So some of the things that I recommend is, where possible,
my fingers from last night.
in the gi, right? So especially, so I think strengthening the grip, strengthening the hands, and working on things like even the wrist. The wrists get overlooked quite a lot. So we do a lot of gripping and holding, but things like the ability to move and flex our wrist, stuff like that, we get our wrist turned and twisted quite a lot. So I like to do hand strengthening and grip strengthening. Sometimes for a beginner, just working out with free weights and actually moving them around is enough. But as you move up the ranks, or depending on how strong you want to be in grip, I think actually doing some specific movement on that is important. That may not be so important to a striker who's primarily closed fists most of the time. Another element for BJJ that I like to work as well is the neck. So they take tremendous pressure on the neck in terms of like rotations, being pulled, cranked, having the gi wrapped around it. I think like John Danaher described the gi as like a noose built into a coat, which is basically what it is.
It's like a piece of rope.
Absolutely.
That's it.
So I see a lot of practitioners with neck injuries. The thing that interests me with neck, like I've had a few neck injuries myself, and the thing that's interesting is when you look at neck training, there's a lot of old school wrestling neck training, which is not necessarily wrong, but it's kind of coming at the high end. So you see a lot of things like neck bridging, reverse neck bridging and stuff like that, which can be good when done correctly.
Sounds painful.
But yeah, for sure. And it's like, I like to try and come in at a lower level, and even just moving the neck. A lot of people don't move the neck that much, so even just getting used to actually moving the neck and improving the mobility of the neck is really important. And then another element that I like to train that seems to get excluded quite a lot is rotation. So a lot of people like to train like linearly, like forward and backwards, left to right, but the rotation of the body gets left out quite a lot. You see it sometimes in core trainings, like people that are trying to improve their abs and stuff like that, but it doesn't often get trained as much. And so that's why somebody could be very, very strong linearly, so they could have a really strong deadlift or a really strong squat, and you start in a standing position, somebody rotates you for a throw, or even in the prone position on the ground, somebody sweeps you.
Okay.
And I see a lot of people that get kind of strains around their kind of intercostals and around their ribs, or even problems in the lower back as well. So I like to train holistically, but those are a few areas that I think for a BJJ athlete are quite important to train. Because like I say, there tend to be areas that are focused on quite a lot. And then somewhere in there, I like to put in some isometrics. What I try to do is separate skills training and attribute training. So it doesn't matter how strong your arms are, you're never going to apply a choke correctly if you don't have the technique and the skill. That's why you could get a very small, weaker athlete apply a choke to you that could feel like the most powerful choke you've ever been in. However, it is still backed up by attributes. So there is definitely a decent level of evidence to support getting in the gym and actually backing up some of those technical attributes with strength training is important. However, I'm not a massive fan of people in the gym trying to like really replicate what they're doing in training. So for example, say somebody wants to improve their ability to lift somebody up, they may need to improve, say, their leg strength, their lower back strength. So a squat or a deadlift might be a perfect choice. Now, there's nothing wrong with picking up a punch bag, a sandbag, a tackle dummy, or whatever else. But when you start to try and make it really technical, I'd rather just get a training partner and practice the lift on them. So I think what we want to try and do in the gym is train an attribute and then go to the mat and then practice the skill backed up with our new attribute. What I find is that people kind of get too hung up on like the buzzword of functional training. So if it doesn't look exactly like, my Imanari roll or my like crotch lift or whatever I'm trying to do in the gym, it's not functional for training. And
it's like taking sport specific to absurd levels, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Where you actually lose like the functionality of the movement.
Absolutely.
You're just trying to, like you said, replicate the movement that you do in your competition.
100%.
Add weight to it. That doesn't actually make sense from a kind of a programming perspective.
And the problem is that the more exotic the technique, the more interesting it is in terms of how it looks visually. If you put that out, say from like a training point of view, that's more likely to get eyes on it. in terms of, so you're always kind of stuck. But the main videos or things that I get sent from athletes are like, have you seen this guy running backwards on a treadmill with a snorkel on?
Yeah.
Says this, you know, but there's nobody just doing, you know, a bench press. So I think overall for BJJ, grip, isometric strength, and I like to work the neck as well, but that would be kind of the 20%. I guess that would be different to another combat athlete, whereas the bulk of it would be just making the body stronger, more athletic, and really the overlooked thing I think is like more robust to injury.
Yeah, because the problem is with the training we've got with Gracie, it's purely technique really. We do a little warm up and then stretching at the end, but there's no like focused exercises on you know, improving strength and flexibility and things like this. So I've been myself, you know, with this obsessive mind, I've already signed up for a competition in
nice.
I think in July or August. I'm in Brighton.
Wow.
So I need to work on it, because I you know, I'm going to be fighting someone my weight. I'm going to be as nimbly as fast as me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's so important to work on your strength and flexibility as well. So I will definitely get in touch with you guys.
Nice.
Yeah, we have to help.
Okay, I think that's it. I think we've covered almost everything. Just checking whether I...
Yeah, I was saying, to be fair, we probably could have talked on any one of those subjects for the entire podcast about them, but I think we did a good job of being concise and trying to summarise things.
It wasn't easy to squeeze everything in such a short time. Before we finish, if you could just mention again your gym, where can we find it, any social media, so hopefully people can get in touch with you.
Sure. So you can check us out at grapplemachine.com and at Grapple Machine on Instagram and Facebook, and apexfitnesssystems.com and Apex Fitness Systems on Facebook and Instagram as well. So we're pretty easy to find.
Okay, and your gym is?
So we're based in person at Impact Gym in Bristol, which is in Staple Hill. That's where you'll be able to actually see us one-to-one or see us working out as well.
Yeah, and we all have our own individual pages as well, don't we? Individual coaching pages. So if you want like a broader view of like what we do as a company, follow the company pages. If you like a bit of personality thrown in as well, to your point about like my posts and whatnot, then give us an individual follow as well.
Yeah,
so,
follow these guys. It's very educational, very enlightening about fitness and nutrition. Okay, well, thank you so much. It's been
Thanks for having us.
It's been great. That's it.
Awesome.
Cut!